Today we're going to look at a couple of example charts using the principles of the four aims of life and four elements to see how this all works together. Now remember that the Dharma houses correspond to the fire element, the Artha houses correspond to the earth element, the Kama houses relate to the air element, and the Moksha houses relate to the water element. So if you have a fire sign on your ascendant, then the aims and the elements, they'll align with each other, and they might give you a little more of a straightforward or directive manner. However, if your ascendant is an earth, water, or air sign, then assessing these things can get a little bit trickier. So please refer to the text for more in-depth meanings of these houses and their associations when you're looking at your own chart. The first chart we're going to look at is Paramahansa Yogananda. And I want you to notice that his rising sign is Leo, which is a sign of authority figures, and it's ruled by the sun. So both the house aims and the elements here will align with each other since it's a fire sign. Now, he was indeed a very directive go-getter in his life. He didn't waste time in reaching his goals, and he often compared his path as either a rocket ship or an airplane to God. So if we count the planets in his Dharma and fire houses, we see that there's the moon in Leo in the first house. The sun and Mercury are in Sagittarius in the fifth house. There's Rahu, which is in Aries in the ninth house. You should also note that his ascendant is a fire sign as well. Also, these houses, the first, fifth, and ninth, they're very benefic houses, and we'll get into this later, but his chart's very, very powerful, and it's interesting for study. So right away we can see that there is this emphasis on those qualities of Dharma and doing what is right, following one's path with drive and ambition, and leading or teaching people from the associations that we learned in our reading. And we can really see Yogananda's life as a true embodiment of Dharma on so many levels, as he was consumed by writing and teaching others, following spiritual disciplines and so forth. So read his autobiography of a yogi, and it'll give you insight into his life in these regards. Now, if we count his planets in the Artha houses and the earth signs, we see that there's Saturn in the sign of Virgo only. And looking at the Kama, or the pleasure houses, there's only Ketu in the third house in the sign of Libra. So here we can see that both the concerns of wealth and pleasure were not really at the forefront of Yogananda's life. So while he may have had a lot of organizations surrounding him, and which did amass much wealth and did much in the practical world, Yogananda's role was in these other domains of life, of the teaching and meditating and so forth. It's also important to note, too, that the lack of error, that quality of doing whatever we please in our life is missing here, as he did lead a very disciplined, directed, and one-pointed life. Lastly, if we count the number of planets in the moksha houses, we see that there's Venus in Scorpio, or the fourth house, and Jupiter and Mars are in the eighth house of Pisces. These places show that the second most amount of planets in his chart, and it's only fitting that it's those qualities of moksha or liberation, as well as the water element, which are giving him those nurturing and intuitive guidance that are really befitting to his teachings. We can also add an extended emphasis on Jupiter here, since he's very well placed and in his own sign of Pisces, which he rules. And it's the eighth house, which can also represent anything beneath the surface, such as occult secrets or mysteries of the universe. So this kind of gives an added emphasis there on that moksha and liberation. Most of his planets are also, if we look at the quadrants, they're mainly in the mind quadrant, showing that emphasis on meditation and interiority throughout his life. So despite worldly success and organizations and traveling and whatnot, he always maintained that inward motion in his life. Looking at further concerns of the ruler of the first house, which we get into in the workbook, we see that it's the sun who rules Leo. So Leo is his ascendant once again, and the sun is the ruler of that, and it's placed within the fifth house. From the workbook, you'll know that this can indicate things such as education, teaching, creativity, and children, and it places an emphasis on these things within the native's life. And we know that Yogananda was indeed very learned. He composed musical works, he painted, and he also often referred to his disciples as children. And since he was a saint, all these things, the music he composed, his disciples, his children, this came out under the guidance of his saintly qualities. Now, the next chart we're going to look at is that of President Barack Obama. And we want to see how these things can shift quite a bit. So since Obama's ascendant is the earth sign of Capricorn, his elements and aims of life, they won't line up, and we'll have to consider each one independently. And I'm just going to run down the planets here really quickly so you get a feel for how you do this when you get some practice in. First off, we see that he has Jupiter and Saturn in his first house of Capricorn, as well as the moon in the fifth house of Taurus. Looking at his fire signs, we see that Mars and Rahu are in the eighth house in Leo. Moving on to his Artha houses, there's Ketu in the second house, and Aquarius and Venus in the sixth house in Gemini. For the earth signs, there's Saturn, Jupiter, and his ascendant in the earth sign of Capricorn, along with the moon in the fifth house in Taurus. And now counting the Kama houses, there's Mercury and Sun in the seventh house in Cancer. And the air signs, there's Ketu in the second house, as well as Venus in the sixth house in Gemini. Finally, with the moksha houses, there's Mars and Rahu in the eighth house. And with the water signs, there's Mercury and Sun in the water sign of Cancer in the seventh house. So while this might just be a little laborious at first and you feel like you're running down a chart, over time you'll get better at reading these aspects, and it'll become almost second nature when looking at the chart. But they're really fundamental in getting your first impression of someone's chart. When we run down all of Obama's planets, we can see here right away that he's fairly well balanced across all the aims of his life, as well as the elements in his chart. And this is very fitting for someone of his stature that really has to please others and work with others on, in a very wide range of fields on a constant basis. Also notice that a lot of his planets are falling within this other quadrant, suggesting his work involves social work, doing hard things, tedious work to improve the life of others, and it's really, really apt for someone in the role of a president. And also notice that while there is a fairly well balance between the planets and elements, there is a slight emphasis on the Dharma houses, showing his commitment to doing what is right, leading others, even though his even nature might really keep him from taking this to the extreme to be kind of a leader such as Yogananda, or a teacher such as Yogananda. He has to temper himself in his role as president. And there's also two more aspects within the earth sign category, giving us emphasis to that practicality and that hardworking nature of Obama coming more to the forefront. You can also note that his first house ruler, Saturn, is in the first house. So this gives him an emphasis and concern with his identity and how he appears to others. And this emphasis on identity is also making him really stick out from the crowd, which is really apt here. The fact that it's Saturn being placed here gives an emphasis on that idea of hard work, as well as a sternness and no-nonsense attitude when it comes to that. Now, for our final chart, we're going to look at quite the opposite of these figures, and we're going to look at Kurt Cobain, who is a legendary, rock figure from the early '90s. And for those not familiar with Cobain, he was, a highly influential rock star. He broke through mainstream radio and made grunge, loud music, and whatnot, a very popular mainstay. He later overdosed on heroin at a young age, and he left behind a rock star wife, Courtney Love, and a young daughter. And their problematic relationship was also the front page news because of his status. So these are kind of really important keystones to touch on when we're looking at his chart. Once again, we see that we have a fiery ascendant, so the elements and signs are going to link up. Now, looking at his chart, we see that he only has Rahu in a Dharma house, which is the 9th house, and it's the fiery sign of Aries. It's interesting to note that this is the sign of teachers, of wisdom, of learning. And so when you learn about the planets, you'll know that Rahu can be a planet of perversion and unorthodox views, which obviously informed Cobain's life as he often struggled in schools and did as he pleased. The small influence of Rahu and its ascendant in here also likely gave him the undeveloped qualities of the fire sign, namely anger and ego. Note that there's no planets in his Artha or Earth houses, showing very, very little concern for practicality, want of hard work, or being down to earth on any level. While he might have amassed a lot of wealth through his fame and whatnot, much of it was also lost due to his excesses as well as his eventual suicide. We also know that he was often known to break guitars and amps on stage, and this really showed a blanket disregard for the earth element if you've ever seen one of his live shows. Now, most of Cobain's planets are in the Kama houses and the air houses, and this is really where he gets a lot of his qualities. We see that there's Mars and Ketu, which is a really fiery combination, in the 3rd house and Libra. There's Mercury and the Sun in the 7th house and Aquarius, and his moon within the 11th house in Gemini. Now, Cobain exhibited many air qualities on both the developed and undeveloped side. So on one hand, he was definitely creative, carefree, and perhaps sociable at times. However, he was much, much more prone to those undeveloped qualities, namely doing whatever he pleased. He became addicted to substances, which really perhaps contributed to his death. Now, in the moksha and water signs, we see that there's Venus and Saturn in the 8th house in Pisces. There's Jupiter in the 12th house in Cancer. Now, this is the second main category of planets when we start to look at his charts. And it's also important to note that the planets that the houses that these planets are in, these are houses of obstacles, death, loss, and illness. So the fact that these are water houses contributed him to being very lost in his emotion, in his thought, and becoming ungrounded. So these are all really keystones of a depressive person with these house indications, since he showed the more undeveloped qualities of these houses. It's interesting to note, too, that the ruler of his ascendant Leo is in his 7th house, which we might not necessarily expect. Our workbook suggests that this shows a focus on relationship and marriage as a lesson to learn in his life, and something that the native focuses on. And so his aforementioned marriage with Courtney Love, as well as the fact that people often attributed his suicide because they said he couldn't deal with fame. He wanted to have regular relationships, and just being a rock star, it really, tore at his soul and who he was. But it wasn't really possible to do that because of his status and, having his marriage, his relationship on front page headlines and everything, created many issues with his life. This is also corroborated by the fact that most of his planets are in the relationship quadrant. Yet, due to his insistence and living, within those Kama air patterns, doing what he wants, likely created many of the issues here because he didn't focus on others enough, but rather was really focused on himself. So these are just a few examples, and hopefully they're helpful in helping you understand how even some of these few really simple building blocks in the chart can start to tell us a lot about ourselves, how our lives are functioning, and where we might need to make some shifts, some changes. Sometimes it might be so clear, especially when the signs and the houses don't line up, but just keep looking at more charts, keep reflecting on these things, and watching how they play out in your life, and it'll eventually start to come with ease. So thanks again, and be well.